Thank you, Senator. It is now rotated back to my time as we finish the first round of questioning, and I had asked a question in my first round about ideas to enhance the personnel standards and quality, retention, creativity of the intelligence community, and I would be interested in the General and Congressman Hamilton's comments.
Senator Graham, we talked a lot in the Hart-Rudman Commission about this problem of personnel. And one of the conclusions we reached was that the personnel or the civil service system in the United States has now become a national security issue. We think it is that serious, or we thought it was that serious a problem. I know you're wrestling with this in the Senate right now on the Department of Homeland Security, and I don't mean my comments to be directed too much to that. There is too much rigidity in the system. There is not enough allowance for incentive, and it is an exceedingly serious problem in our government. And it has national security consequences. We've got to work through this matter so that managers can manage more effectively. I've had the experience of running a congressional office. And I've also had the experience, as I am now having at the Wilson Center, of running at least part of my employees there under the federal system. I would absolutely assure you, ladies and gentlemen, that you would not tolerate in your office the kind of management restrictions that operate today in the federal government. You could not run a senatorial office. Now, I know the importance of this to employees, so it's a tough problem. But the only thing I want to say here, Senator, when you talk about personnel, we are now approaching this national security review, and we have to look at the civil service system, and we have to find ways and means of getting more flexibility into it. If we don't, we're going to choke ourselves to death.
Before turning to the General, you mentioned that you became aware of the severity of this problem while serving on the Hart-Rudman Commission. Did that commission make some recommendations as to, and were you?
Yes, it did.
Do those recommendations basically represent your thoughts as to what should be done?
They do, and if you want it in one word, it's more flexibility.
General?
I don't have a lot to add. I endorse Mr. Hamilton's points with all the force I can. I mean, dealing with even with people in the intelligence community who are not necessarily under as free a reign as the rest of the federal service, it's still difficult. I'd much rather have the people in uniform. I know how to hire and fire people in uniform. If they're not in uniform, it's hard to, you can't hire and fire them. And the intelligence business is warfare. And if you don't look at it that way, you're going to be beaten. I mean, it's not a friendly affair. It's not a negotiating affair. You're going to take the other guy, or he's going to have you. And would you run the NFL football club that way? Would you choose your quarterbacks on this kind of basis? Well, I don't want to choose my agents. I don't want to choose my analysts on that basis.
My time is going to be out soon, and I have another major question that I'd like to ask, which I'm going to hold to the next round. But for this, General, you've talked with wisdom and insight on the specific issue of counterintelligence. Recently, there was organized what's called CI 2000, I believe, which is a multi-agency effort at counterintelligence. It is supposed to have a couple of particular qualities. One, to approach counterintelligence in a proactive basis, such as identifying what are the crown jewels that our adversaries might want to learn, and then begin to ask, how do we defend those against attack. It also has a heavy emphasis on what I would call benchmarking, trying to ask what are the best practices in the intelligence community, and things like use of polygraphs to try to enhance our defenses against espionage. Do you have any comment about that initiative?
I do. The intelligence study that was cited, which you have, that I did in 1997, is being published as a book at Yale Press. It'll come out in January, which has been de-acronymized, so it's a little more accessible to the public. I bring up this point and try to clarify what I think is a serious muddle in that kind of proposal. I said earlier, counterintelligence is information about the other person's intelligence capabilities and what they're seeing of you. Security is not an intelligence responsibility. Let me put this in a practical case that I lived through. Most of you remember the Soviet bugging the Moscow embassy. My agency had a lot to do with discovering that. I had subordinates who thought they got their instructions from God, protecting the crown jewels, and they were going to go down and make George Shultz shape up, clean up the embassy in Moscow. I had to explain to them that we could make the information available that the KGB was reading his mail. It was his authority to decide whether or not he cared. NSA couldn't do anything about that. But I had really, I had very people who were deeply convinced that we needed to do something. Some were down here lobbying the staffs and the members of the Congress on trying to force the Secretary of State to do what he might or might not want to do. My point was, the President hired him, and the President's finally responsible for the security. If he wants the Secretary of State to fix the Moscow embassy properly, he should order him to do it. The intelligence people can't do that. A counterintelligence service cannot protect the secrets. Security is a manager's responsibility. He buys the locks and puts them on the doors. He hires the guards. The intelligence guys, this fellow goes out and finds information. And I've run into these well-meaning people who confuse the security role with the counterintelligence role. And unless you sort that out, you will find yourself with organizational muddles you wish you had never gotten in.
Thank you, General. Senator Shelby.
General, we're not picking on you. We appreciate all three of you, and we appreciate Judge Webster, too. As a matter of fact, I read again today your article, and I had read it back in June that was published in the Wall Street Journal. I thought it was very interesting and maybe perhaps instructive. The British have what we call, or what they call, MI5, right? How does MI5 work in the UK?
I don't claim to be a great expert on MI5, but I can tell you what my impressions are. It does counterintelligence.
Yes, sir. We know.
Only counterintelligence.
Nothing else, does it?
Nothing else. It's not a law enforcement agency. It turns to Scotland Yard to arrest people. But it's different from my proposal.
That's what I wanted you to get into.
It stands out there alone and is a competitor. In my proposal, the National Counterintelligence Service would be under the DCI, just like the CIA would be. Number two, MI5, I do not believe, can look into the counterintelligence picture held by MI6. In other words, MI6 in its offensive operations will inevitably get into counterintelligence. They'll learn about the other guy's spies. So everybody's going to be doing some counterintelligence. But this agency, which does only counterintelligence, needs to look in there so he can see whether there's a gap, whether his agency is being played off against the other one. And I don't think MI5 looks into any counterintelligence activities in the Ministry of Defense in Britain. I could be wrong about that. But what I propose is that there would not be counterintelligence operations run in the military services that were not coordinated with the National Counterintelligence Service. So that the National Counterintelligence Service could look down every one of these closed holes and see what the overall picture looks like. you can't do that, you're not going to have a comprehensive picture. I mean, it's not to exaggerate. If I were a foreign intelligence service, I would love to run against the FBI and the CIA and the counterintelligence capabilities here. You've just got big gaps welcoming you to come through.
They've done quite well, haven't they?
Looks that way.
Against the FBI. Why would you want to, and I'm not saying it's good or bad, it's just your proposal, to put this under the DCI or the Central Intelligence as opposed to a freestanding entity?
I want it to be freestanding away from the CIA.
Okay.
I want it under a director of Central Intelligence who is not the director of CIA.
So what we've been talking about is like creating, as Lee Hamilton mentioned,
exactly.
a CEO, a chairman of the board of the intelligence community.
It's closer. I think Congressman Hamilton wants more executive budget execution authority than I do. But on otherwise, I think we overlap enormously. Also, this was my point to Senator Feinstein, that if you're trying to force these people in the room together, you've got the DCI in control of both of them. He could cause them to do that. Counterintelligence is intelligence. They're more closer kin in their skills, their cultures, etc., to the rest of the intelligence community than they are to law enforcement.
General, how would the other agencies, assuming this counterintelligence agency or entity was created as you would envision, how would the other community, how would they share their information? You know, they would have information dealing with some counterintelligence. Would they not? I mean, you know, it's just cross-fertilization there, huh?
Absolutely. It's called multidisciplinary approach to counterintelligence. They will be a user of the National Imagery Agency collection. They will be in a position to task the National Imagery. They can do, the FBI, if it wanted to, could do that today under the way the system's organized. We were talking about a Homeland Security Department. With the present intelligence community system, maybe it isn't run very well. I don't know. But when I was there, I got a list from all kinds of agencies. And I had to put the priorities up there and give those agencies the priority that the DCI put his stamp on. And the Homeland Security would get it. If FBI actually did a lot of support for FBI, that was not the problem. The problem tends to be where it's a human intelligence kind of activity. And CI gets limited entirely, almost entirely, to human intelligence approaches in the FBI. And if it were centralized, it would use signals, imagery, the whole thing.
Mr. Chairman, I know my time's up, but if one quick, just a second there. You point out, and I think you do it well, General, that there's a heck of a difference between counterintelligence and law enforcement, you know, and the methods that you go about it, because you're dealing with different type of people, and you have to have different approaches to them, and I commend you for that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Shelby. Senator Rockefeller.
One quick one, but important to me. Congressman, you've talked about no corporation would run this way. Got to have somebody at the top. Mr. Hitz, I'm not sure that I'm quite sure where you stand on that, but that's not, I'm just covering the base here with you, not trying to find out. And I suspect you lean in that direction, General. To some degree, accountability. Throughout a lot of discussions that we've had, both open and closed, it's always been rattling around the back, it's often rattled around the back of my mind, that the ultimate consumer on behalf of all of this, and the one who has the most to gain and the most to lose if the system isn't operating properly, and the one who has the most power, albeit not legislative, but in effect can have an enormous effect on that too, is the President of the United States. And it mystifies me that when we meet, we talk about what kind of legislation can we get passed, when all of these commissions that Eleanor Hill talked about this morning put in their 2 years of work and put out terrific reports, and then nothing happens. it's because you're addressing that in a sense to the world at large, but sort of generally to us and to a fairly elite community that would be interested. If anybody after 9/11 has to be interested, it's the President of the United States. And if anybody has the power to make certain kinds of changes through executive authority, directives, through jawboning, through calling people in and saying, I want, and I think intelligence, the business of intelligence, is one of the 3 or 4 most important things that happens in the country today. And in terms of the survival of the nation, along with a good fighting force, intelligence has to be it. And so therefore, what could be more important to him or to her than that? So my question to you is, why is it that the president somehow never comes into our discussions? You know, I mean, I gave an interview. It's probably a little bit naughty of me, but with all due respect, Your Excellency, that the president has a lot of authority as to what gets passed and what doesn't get passed in the House of Representatives on certain subjects. I'm not talking about intelligence, but energy, a lot of other things, and taxes and things of that sort. And that defines the power. That's his right. If he feels strongly about something, that's what he's meant to do. He's the only person elected by everybody, and now it's to protect us. And so what is it that that he could be doing about this?
Senator Rockefeller, that's where I am on the answer to your first question. I think at the end of the day, the President of the United States has the principal interest, I would say, in getting the intelligence information that he needs to do his job, and on the terrorist side, to stay in business. And the difficulty with him being made accountable in the sense that you all are seeking it here is that you don't have the same kind of ability to reach him as you would one of his cabinet officials in terms of calling him up to testify. But at the end of the day, it's the President of the United States who has to make sure that the Director of Central Intelligence, the Director of the FBI, the SecDef, all of them cooperate to do the best job.
And maybe if there were a conflict between, that he saw between, as we've talked about today, the 85% budget authority and the 15% left over for the Central Intelligence Agency, and he found that not helpful to his national security purposes and national intelligence purposes, he would be in a position, I would think, to be able to do something about that. We aren't. Yes, sir.
I said earlier here to someone's question, what do you do? How do you get reform? And I pointed out, I brought the president's name up. The president, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, if they want to change this, they can change it. They're the users, and for the very reasons you said, they are the source of change if you're going to have it. But let me point out that intelligence is a support function, and it's a specialized kind of activity for an overall operation. And when you say there's no corporation in the U.S. that doesn't have a single person in charge. Personnel operations are going on everywhere, but we don't have a commander of personnel. And the OPMS runs sort of the federal personnel service, but it doesn't hire and fire in all the departments. They do that. So you're dealing with something that is a support function. And if you begin to differentiate it out too much to where you have budget execution, et cetera, then you really get in trouble with it. But the place where the president can't change this, I think, without your support over here, is with the FBI counterintelligence, because that is a statutory agency with certain authorities. And I don't think he could write an executive order that takes, maybe he could, write an executive order that takes the counterintelligence role away from the FBI, leaving it.
But he can encourage us to.
Pardon?
He could encourage us to do that.
Well, if you should do that.
Yes, but I mean, but he could be helpful in that process. My time is out now.
Sure.
I thank you all, and I apologize to the chairman.
Thank you, Senator, very much. I have delayed my questions primarily because I have been summoned in and out a number of times on other matters, and I want to apologize to you because I think the value added from the contributions you've all made, and what Judge Webster's included, has helped us very much. We have an extraordinary amount of wisdom in front of us, and we have an extraordinary amount of experience, and we take that not lightly, and I'm glad we're able to apply it to the future, to the solutions. And a lot of good ideas. Just the list that Eleanor Hill read of all of the blue ribbon commissions that we've had sort of wrestling with this, or using as a benchmark maybe the fall of the wall. Since that time, the number of ways we've gone at this question of what is an intelligence community and how do we make it work and what's the purpose of it and so forth. We're in my view, a totally expected part of the Washington cycle in this sense, that we've had some extraordinarily good wisdom from some extraordinarily knowledgeable people over the years on what to do about the intelligence community and the threat and the nature of the globe today, and that the sky was going to fall unless. And the record is replete with that. And as we get our very capable staff to go through it, we see time and time again, including people in front of me, who have said, if you don't get a hold of this one, bad things are going to happen. And of course, the bad things happen. So I have two questions. The first question is, how do we get an audience? How do we get an audience? We certainly have the message. We certainly understand the problem, and we certainly have some good ideas for fixes. The question is, how do you get that audience? And I don't know. And I am just as frustrated as everybody else, because I'm there too thinking I failed. I wasn't unable to get that message across either in my time. Even though I saw it, I just couldn't sound the warning. And I feel a lot of us on these oversight committees are feeling that these days. And a lot in the intelligence community as well, to be sure. The second question goes to the media question that was brought up. I think Congressman Hamilton mentioned the good old days when there was a very different relationship between the intelligence community and the media, and that was basically the twain shall never meet. No comment was about as long the sentence ever got. And I remember how far oversight has come since my days in the agency in the late 50s and 60s, when oversight was a very different thing than the formalized function that it is now. But the whole problem we have is we're in that Washington cycle where we didn't get our audience, so now we've done what we always do. We've gone to the public. And we said, intelligence matters. It really does. And we need to have the right kind of capabilities. In order to go to the public, we've had to go to the media. And that, of course, is dangerous because everybody has a little different slant on it. So what you see is a phenomenon in front of you that while we understand with some particularity the threat, understand some very good solutions that might help us, we have got many, many ideas in the minds of our constituency out there about what we should do and how much we should pay for it and where we should go. And it is now a more complicated matter in some ways than it was before, because there are people with agendas to do things differently. My view has been that it is important to inform the American people because we have got a huge number of debates that certainly Congressman Hamilton will relate to of the frictions that are between us. The question of the intelligence culture of keeping the information flowing versus the law enforcement of prosecution successfully to put people in jail. The question of need to know and compartmentation versus coordination and cooperation. These are in direct conflict, it seems. Of foreign intelligence and no, Americans will never spy on Americans domestically. The questions of risk takers in the field, the frictions between the field and headquarters that don't rock the boat, people at headquarters, and the tension of headquarters and field that we always have anyway. The question of Americans have a right to know anything that isn't ought to be guarded. I'm not sure where that's stated exactly, but it's believed that Americans should know everything. We have the question of the analysts can't do their job unless they have all the raw data or just some of the raw data that has been seen by other analysts going on. We have the culture of the users that says the military gets too much of the product. No, the national customer gets too much of the product. We've got to realign the allocations. There's not a new debate in here that you haven't heard. Nothing I've just said is new. It's just unresolved. And we need to start making some conclusions in some of these things, because I think Judge Webster said the main debate we have before us is striking the balance true between being a free society and a protected society. And I don't think we can get there unless we have this debate, and that means we have to enlist the support of the media. So that is the posit I have before you, is how do we have an informed electorate, an informed constituency on this subject, given all those problems, and how do we get that audience that hears us clearly and comes away unconfused and says, of course, go do that. If you can help us with that, I am eternally grateful. Mr. Hitz.
Chairman Goss, and I don't mean to be pulling out an example that is inapposite, but I think you have a model in the deliberations of the Church Committee, much of which are being criticized nowadays, certain aspects. They held long hearings on the matter and began to move a bill in the succeeding Congress. And as they moved the bill, they discovered that writing charters for the FBI, CIA, NSA, elsewhere, in the context of the world situation the Congress and the President were finding at the time, just didn't make a lot of sense, the thou shalts and thou shalt nots. And at the end of the day, as you recall, in 1980, a simple 2 or 3 paragraph bit of legislative language was passed, causing the intelligence communities and the director of the intelligence community, rather, the director of Central Intelligence, to keep the Congress fully and currently informed about a range of issues. You've taken it from that way. And all I'm saying is, aren't you really saying with the work that you've done, you've got some ideas. We've talked about a number of them today, the DNI concept, et cetera. As you move a bill, you're going to find that either support develops for that idea or people come up with some kind of reason why it shouldn't go. And it seems to me you are to some degree addressing that audience just by virtue of the legislative undertaking that this is a predicate for. I mean, I think that's how it's going to come out. And if it doesn't stop with you at the end of this series of hearings in your final report and appears to be going on to a commission, which may have a broader ambit, that they'll, I suppose, have something to say about it too. But you do have, at least where I sit, you do have an audience in the sense of an American public that wants to see what can be done to improve our intelligence and law enforcement performance in this area.
Thank you. Congressman Hillin.
Before I try to respond to the unanswerable question you've raised here,
I have.
let me say that I think your explanation a few moments ago of the tensions, if you would, between a democratic society on the one hand and intelligence on the other was a very, very good statement.
Thank you.
And it reflects how, as I said in my statement, how awkward it is for the intelligence function to fit in a democratic society. 2 or 3 comments. You ask, how do you reach an audience? The answer to that, in part, is that the audience you want to reach is a very elite audience. Most people aren't interested in intelligence. I think they're more interested in it after September 11th than they were before, and they're beginning to see the importance of it. But what we've been talking about today is an insider's game.
Very much.
And so the audience is not vast out there, I believe, and therefore should be somewhat easier to reach. Now, having said that, I hope I don't contradict myself by saying that I do think it's very important to reach out to the public. You're doing that in these hearings, which are public, but I must say, Mr. Goss, I'm not sure, but if you look over the last decade or so and saw the percentage of open hearings that the Intelligence Committee has had in the House and the Senate, it'd be fairly small.
Very small.
Because most of your business has to be done in secret. I'm not critical of that, it's just a fact. We've had CIA directors in the past who were really interested in the problem you raise. Bob Gates comes to mind. And Mr. Gates made an extended effort. I went with him, as a matter of fact, around the country giving speeches together. One legislative viewpoint, his, the executive branch, on the intelligence community. And we went to a number of college campuses, and there was enormous interest in that. In other words, here was a CIA director who was concerned about the kind of things you're talking about, really made it a point, with all of the CIA director has to do, to reach out to the American people. In this case, he went to a lot of campuses to tell people about the intelligence function. Well, I think that's a very important part of it. The third point I'd make is that there is value in the debate itself, even if you don't reach a conclusion. I really think that's the case. We've all seen that in the democratic process. The mere fact that General Odom and I may have difference of opinion about what you do with the DCI, we're not probably going to resolve that to either one of us' satisfaction, but the fact that you discuss it is important and makes each one of us more sensitive to the other's point of view, which I think has been terribly important here. The final word would be George Shultz's statement, who said, "Nothing is ever finally decided in this town," and there's a lot of truth in that.
Thank you, General Odom.
I would just make 2 points. I think Senator Rockefeller has already preemptively answered a lot of your questions. You don't need a big public audience to get these things done. You need the people in charge who use the intelligence to do it. So I even have wonderment about this endeavor in this way. And second, that takes me to my second point. Maybe we didn't have the information because the trend over the past 10 or 12 years, and even more recently, has been to make our intelligence activities a lot more transparent.
Yep.
And I can tell you as an intelligence operator, if I were running Al-Qaeda, with what I could read in the American press, I could see how to evade you. So I think the publicity approach to intelligence ought to be seriously scrutinized in light of the intelligence failure last 11 September.
My time has long expired, and that's the subject of a great debate. Can a free, democratic, open society that plays by the Marquis of Queensberry rules exist in a globe where not everybody else is playing by the Marquis of Queensberry rules? But my time has expired, and I'd love to take that up in Chapter 2. Thank you, sir.
We have now completed round 2, and we're now at round 3, which I think will be the conclusion of our imposition on your time. The question I wanted to ask, which has haunted me from September the 11th, before September the 11th, particularly since then, and that was, it seems as if the intelligence community had a difficult time recognizing that the Cold War had ended, and that some of its practices, which were the product of the Cold War, were not relevant or not the most relevant to the new world in which the intelligence community would be called upon to provide information to decision makers. I would put, just as a few characteristics of that failure to evolve, the fact that we had big struggles over whether to use a satellite architecture that seemed to be more aligned to continuing to look at the Soviet Union rather than the flexibility to look at multiple issues. The continued decline in human intelligence, which had started at the end of the Cold War and continued after the Cold War, when you would appear that the nature of our adversary would be such that we need more emphasis on human intelligence. Some of the problems that NSA had in the 1990s, including one period where it went black for a while, with it said that our technology was falling behind the technologies with which we had to compete. A, do you believe that in fact we have what I call the Darwinian problem of failure to recognize that the environment in which we're living is changing, and by that failure almost consign ourselves to a death spiral? And B, if that is an accurate, maybe a little over-dramatized statement, what can we inject into these big intelligence agencies to give them a greater capacity to recognize changes and to respond to them? Because it's my thesis that if there's been significant change in the world in which the intelligence community operates since the end of the Cold War, if you project an equivalent period of time into the future, there will be even more change during that the next 11 or 12 years. So what can we do to try to not require a 9/11 incident to shake us that the world is changing and we need to change and adapt to it, or we will die of irrelevance?
Well, if I may be so bold, excuse me, Lee, just to start, I lived through part of it, Mr. Chairman, as did all of you in this on the dais, and the shift over after 91, I think you're accurate in saying, took a long time. Part of it, and there's no blame to be levied here, part of it was the notion that the intelligence community thought it, like the military services, was going to pay a peace dividend. We cut back substantially on the recruitment of new personnel. We wanted to get smaller. And when we did that, with the whole changeover in targets that Presidential Decision Directive 35 led us to, good many seasoned operatives decided they had won the Cold War. They were interested, they had enjoyed working against the Soviet target and didn't necessarily wanted to shift over to the new sets of targets. At the same time, we were going through, again, it just happened that way, a revolving door at the top of CIA. I served in a period of 8 years under 5 different directors of Central Intelligence. That's an awful lot of change at the top of a major corporation, and each director, in good faith, had his own ideas of how he wanted to do the job, and sent out a lot of directives and stirred up a lot of commotion, as happens in a bureaucracy. So we were slow on that. But 9/11 was the wake-up call, and as I'm sure has been chronicled before this committee, to an extraordinary degree, the response has been heartening in the sense that new people have applied. The new targets have been measured, but there was a lot of time lost.
I would agree that the intelligence community has had a lot of rigidity in it, and has been slow to change. It focused early on, for example, a few years back on principally on an attack by ballistic missiles. And there are a lot of other things out there other than ballistic missiles, and we learned about them to our regret. It focused very heavily on military threats and overlooked the terrorist threat for a long time. It was focused on advanced technologies and overlooked the importance of the human spy. It focused on collection and not enough on analysis. It had a lot of bureaucratic rigidities. Now, all of that is in the past. All of that, I think, is conventional wisdom that we need corrections there. How do you bring about those corrections? Well, you bring about them exactly the way you've been doing. You've been calling people in here from the intelligence community and pointing out a lot of these things to them, and changes are beginning to occur. When a director of the FBI comes in and says, we're going to start emphasizing prevention instead of law enforcement, that's a revolution. Now, it's going to take a while to carry it out, but it's quite a change. So things are happening, and I think they're happening positively. The process works too slowly, I'm sure, for all of us. But your job which I think you're fulfilling, is to call these people up here and put them on the spot and let them know what you think the changes are that are occurring in the world and in the country. Put a little sunlight on it, make them respond, and the system will move, maybe a little too gradually, a little too slowly, but it'll move.
The comment I would add to this is to make a distinction between policy issues and structural issues. The hearing started out focusing on the structural issues, and in most of Mr. Goss's comments, those were policy issues more than structural issues. We're going to make mistakes, and that's the corrective feedback. Sometimes you pay a higher price, sometimes you pay a smaller price. In the military, we have a tradition: when you screw things up, we relieve the commander, which leaves me puzzled about the behavior of the administration and the intelligence area. I consider intelligence, as I said earlier, a military engagement. And I would hold the commanders as responsible as I would ship commanders who run their ships aground. They don't stay around after they've run them aground, even if they're not very guilty. And I've seen people relieved in Vietnam who you wouldn't believe how little they were relieved for. But the example turned out to quicken the responsiveness of people below. So I think that's the policy issue you're facing on the redress here. The business of shifting adequately, I didn't live through it, but let me explain some of the things I know about it just from old friends and hearsay. You have these big organizations, and they had to make programmatic decisions to downsize. They didn't do that very well, in part because of internal management incompetencies, and also because the community at large does not have a PPBS system. It has a kind of, everybody's pulling his chips in and trying to beggar the other fellow. And the DCI, unless he builds some kind of system to do that, you're not going to improve that very much. This is a structural issue. And it was the second point of my comments, my statement this morning, how you relate input dollars to intelligence output. In the absence of that system, I think explains some of the slowness and viscous reactions within my old agency, NSA, and other parts of the community in the 1990s.
Congressman Goss? Senator Rockefeller?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I can't resist this. I know that it'll get a rise out of the panel, but I want to go back to the comment the General made about transparency, and I don't have the benefit of serving in the intelligence community like some of you have and like Chairman Goss has, but it just seems to me, what's the problem with opening this up? I mean, everybody knows that everybody's watching everybody, and that we're going to monitor people, we're going to monitor weapon systems, we're going to monitor actions and so on and so forth. If there was more transparency, it just seems to me it would be more openness, more sunshine on the issue. Everybody would be aware of what's going on. And the fact is you know, as we're doing the terrorist thing right now, there's not much that's not in the newspaper already about what goes on with that. So why wouldn't we just fess up and just say, this is what we're doing, this is what we're going to do, and if we catch you doing this, we're going to do this? Why wouldn't we do that? And it seems to me it's an honest approach to protecting ourselves, but doing it in a transparent way so people know we are.
Mike, let me answer that very briefly. If we did that, we don't need the intelligence community. That's called the news service. We have a lot now. I'd say 90% of the intelligence that affects policymaking in the government comes out of the media. The media is our best news collection agency. Even some military collection comes out of it. General Vesey, when he was chairman of the Joint Chiefs, would look over at the television, see CNN on someplace and say, Bill, why can't you do that for me? Well, I said, I don't need to because CNN's doing it free. And the intelligence community really needs to take advantage of that. We should. The second point is people have short memories. And even though something's published and made information today, they don't all keep it in mind. And what they're exposing, what they close up from having been alerted, sometime later they may open up again. And if you go around re-emphasizing openness, you keep educating them how to defeat your intelligence collection.
Mr. Condit, I think there has been over a period of years a kind of a set of mind in the intelligence community to keep more secret than is necessary, feeling that we know best how to handle this and it's not a matter that really should be discussed in public. I think the Congress and the oversight committees have done a lot to try to change that perception on their part. And my view would be you want to maximize openness and transparency to the extent that you can, but you do have to recognize you're dealing with a very special business. And you do have to be careful about methods and sources and all of the rest of it. So it's not an easy kind of a balance to strike. In general, I think the intelligence community has erred on the side of too much secrecy and not enough openness. I do think that's changing now, in part because of the Congress and the oversight. There needs to be a greater appreciation by the national security community that the more information that is out there about their job and how tough it is to do, the obstacles they confront, I think the American public understands that pretty well, especially in light of September 11. But I agree with your premise that more transparency is needed, with a very major caveat that you're dealing with a special business here.
I tend to echo that. For the 1 or 2% of information that is acquired from a source or by a technique that we would not want to have revealed in order to be able to use it again, I'm sure that we go to a great extreme to protect things that don't need to be protected. But you do have to protect that essential core.
Well, I think that, and I agree with that point. I just also would underscore that it seems to me all the work that the three of you and the Judge Webster had done on making suggestions, that transparency may be the thing that forces us to make the necessary changes to reform the intelligence community. And it's the very thing that we seem to be frightened of. I just, you know, I think we maybe should take a look at maybe embracing it a little more than we have in the past. But I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Congressman. Again, thank you to each for your very significant contribution today. We have learned a lot from the wise men, and I anticipate that you will represent a well of wisdom and insight that we will want to come back to again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.